herbs, you know. Despite its name, it's not used that way, you know. It's like, and you sell them and things like that. It's like, and I kind of tested her out the first time I met her. She took over the job of someone else that I had met previously, who was not really an herbalist, but Phyllis was. And I was like, oh my God, she really loves her herbs. And we talked a great, we still talk fair amount, and so I get back and forth. But then later, so then I was talking about Tismo quite a bit, and after he died, actually, or after he died on a plane. And she said, you know, that sounds like this guy that used to live in Arab called Spiker. I said, yeah, that's what the alias is he went by. So there was a reason that he knew a lot of herbs in common with Phyllis, because he was also a southern herbalist. I don't know, you know, where sometimes he'd be very direct and he'd say, I know this from Eli. I mean, he didn't hide who his teachers were, but he didn't always just have to mention whether he learned it down there in southern Appalachia or whether he learned it in Michigan, where his home was. But, and of course there's a lot of stuff in common too. But at any rate, so that we actually did have a lot of common. So some of my herbalism is a little bit southern there.
It really is.
Yeah, right. But there's other differences too, and one of the main differences is that they use more drops or herb teas, whereas we use more tinctures in the north. And that, in a certain way, you know, it's like the north is always more manufacturing. It's better if it's been put through the mill by a chemical company or something, you know, which has led to modern medicine. And the south is always more, well, so that's why my granny did it, so I'm going to do it that way. I don't believe in her chemical company.
Some of that. And then there was also some, we didn't have tinctures because we didn't have alcohol, too, because it was all dry.
You didn't have alcohol in Appalachia?
Oh, no, not legal. Not legal alcohol. So it wasn't.
Mighty good alcohol, too.
You know, so you could go down and pick up a gallon unless somebody made it for tincture. So, plus there's a strong Native American tradition, and they only use decoctions too. So, I mean, I still have clients who won't take a tincture because there's alcohol.
For moral reasons.
Yeah, for moral reasons. I mean, it's the religious reasons. Doctrine.
So, and actually, herbs extract differently in water and alcohol and water, basically. I mean, most tinctures, ion extractants, the way Michael Moore does, like in 98, 96, way up high alcohol content. So there, you know, he shaves all the way from high alcohol extraction to more moderate alcohol extraction to drafts. We would leave out in the old days sort of drinking wine for beers, which was a really important thing in the Middle Ages, and Renaissance. And most of the nuns made a lot of that. And so that's really important in Europe, actually, where they still have herbal tinctures made by nuns and things. Strange as that sounds. So there's some of the major differences. Other differences? Well, one thing that's similar is that she lived right at the end of the Appalachian Mountain chain. And I've been around there, and kind of like when I'm in the woods around her house, it's really kind of very southern, more, it's like even further south to me. It's like what you start getting towards Florida and everything. And then if you go to the northern side, like after that, where we ran into the fire house up in that little woods there, it's very much more like a Midwestern oak forest or something. So right within her town, I think maybe due to one is facing north a little bit more.
Well, yeah. One slopes north toward the Tennessee River, and the other one slopes south toward
the Gulf. Right?
The Gulf, right?
Yeah. So just that is a little change where you have more northern woods, and southern ones. Because even here we would have, we're going to have pine forest in the northern and stuff. So we do have a lot of the same herbs, but we don't have something like crossvine and things. Whereas they have almost everything that we have. If you get up behind that mountain in the south there, it's got all the things that we have in the north. And in fact, like things like Machella or partridge berry, we wouldn't have it unless you go into a place where there's a lot of pine and some parts of Wisconsin here, but just particularly Minnesota. Okay. Yeah. Just because there's a lot of pine and stuff.
Yeah, there's that finger of the northern box that comes down into the reserve, and that's the end of the southernmost reserve.
Okay. Yeah, central Wisconsin has a lot of that, but in Minnesota you have to pretty much go north and include Duluth to get those northern herbs. But at any rate, so very similar. So really, we have the same herbal tradition pretty much in that sense from Maine to Georgia, And yes, there are some southern herbs kind of in that from south of Appalachia that we don't have. And then there's some plains herbs that entered the Western herbal tradition late. We don't have as many plains herbs as maybe Paul does teaching. So herbal-wise, we have a lot in common. That's good. So one thing we do is kind of compare notes on how we use herbs, each one of us, as we go along. And I was hoping that some of you guys might be able to chime in depending on how much experience we have. So there's the introduction back to you.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna since most people know you up here and I'm new, I was just gonna kind of give them some of my background, training, and where I'm from, and all that. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm from, as Matthew said, northern Alabama, and I still live in the town, same town I was born in, which is Arab, Alabama. And it is the last mountain in the Appalachians. So I do live in this nice little area where the Appalachian woods actually meet the beginning of the coastal plains. So I get plants from both kind of ecological systems. But I was traditionally getting trained by my grandmother, who was a Creek Indian, and Tismal, who Matthew was talking about, is also Creek, which is why we have such similarity in herb use and stuff. It's Kogi. So, and my grandmother was a midwife and an herbalist, and so had her mother been, and her mother, so, and this is on my father's side, and so, and my family on my father's side, there's been an herbalist and midwife all the way back to the Civil War, but I'm not a midwife, I'm just a herbalist. Okay, so that was my initial training was my grandmother and my father, and so that was more Native American, and which is also Southern. But then later on, I studied with Tommy Bass, who is a true, I would say, Southern Appalachian herbalist, and not so much in the Native American business. So as we talk today, I'll be throwing both Native American over this is Southern, and that would be kind of a little bit of difference between the two. So that was kind of my background. I started practicing maybe when I was 19, somewhere in there. I practiced for a while, and I quit practicing and went to other things. And then I came back and started practicing. So that's kind of my background. Decoctions was always a taught. I mean, I was like, after I met Matthew, I made my first t-shirt. I didn't make t-shirts.
So you guys use some infusions there too?
We used, not really.
Oh, that's right.
Cook little small changes, and that kind of you just do long cooks.
Long cooks with a little herb and lots of water. because when you decoct, it really doesn't take as much herb. And if we had a kitchen in here, or hot plate, we could do some southern decoctions tomorrow. Check and see if we could do that. It's the deeper medicine you're after. So even mints we boil, infuse, and no lid on the top, which is a lot different from like the Northeast tradition that's being taught of long infusions with the lid on. This is like cook it, get the medicine out, not to worry about boiling it. It's amazing, even when I boil up mints, because people go, oh, you can't boil mints, you gotta infuse your mints. Try boiling it in there and see what happens. You know, you can simmer one up for 10 minutes, and you have not lost all your essential oils. They're still there, but you bring out this little bit of bitterness that wasn't there before, too, so it's bringing out different medicine. So that's the tradition there. When he's talking about droughts and teas, it's really a decoction method. I'm trying to think of anything I would infuse. Occasionally I infuse Queen Anne's lace, but generally I boil it too. There might be something that I infuse, but I can't think of this one. Not continually. So, and that's more the traditional method, is those deep decoctions. And actually, when you're through, they look more like soups than decoctions. Which I've, had TCM people in my classes before, and they said, this is the way the Chinese do it too, with these, real soupy, deep decoctions. But it's amazing how strong the medicine is when you do that. So, kind of the first time I met the method of infusing, I thought, wow, this is a nice little beverage tea. It didn't even occur to me that people were using this medicine. It's just so far away from my tradition. But I can see where that could have some nutritive value. Doing long infusions could definitely provide some vitamins and minerals.
Do you do low doses then with those?
Yes, you do because it is strong. You do low doses. Now, low dose with a decoction is like where you go take a tablespoon or an eighth of a cup or a quarter of a cup. That would be. Or Tommy would say, take a good swallow of this. Yeah. And that would be a low dose. Because it would be so strong, and basically, they felt like, the old teachers felt like the darker it was and the more nasty tasting it was, the better it was.
That's like Chinese medicine.
Yeah, it is.
The cure is memorable well enough to change your habits and you won't get there again.
Yeah, I can see that. That's the southern decoction method. If it tastes pretty nasty. But, it's good, strong medicine when it happens. We were talking on the way up about tendons and in somebody's hand that needed some work. And we were talking about herbs to use on it. And I said, well, I would use salt and seal as a decoction to drink it. And usually it just relaxes the tendons and takes the pain away within, a day, if it's going to work. And if it's not going to work, at the end of that day, it's not going to work. And you go try something else, rather than topically or in addition to topically. Remember, Native Americans really didn't have salves as we think of salves. Maybe they had ointments that they kind of made.
They use animal oils a lot.
Pardon?
Animal oils and greases.
Right, they use animal oils and greases. So, like two weekends ago in herb school, we made salve, we used lard. And there's a huge difference in decocting medicine, herbs, and lard than there is in decocting an olive oil. You get twice the constituent decoction in the lard that you do the olive oil. It's pretty amazing. And we did comparisons. We did, okay, this is the lard, this is the olive oil, and we did them both exactly the same way, the same length of decoction time, the same amount of heat. And that lard just really decocted so much more. That salve was so much stronger than the olive oil salve. And I can't even imagine what bear grease would be like. It was like already past my time. The bears they were pretty much gone by the time I was growing up. But, so we used Native Americans use the animal oils to decoct the herbs and then make ointments, which didn't keep that long in the hot.
Geez, berries keeps forever.
Well, berries might keep forever up here, but like I was saying, by the time I came along, we're down to pig. And it doesn't keep that long in the hot southern heat. You have to refrigerate it. You might get a good non-refrigerated in a house with air conditioning left on the counter. You might get a good 6 months out of it, but it goes rancid in the heat pretty quick. So, Native Americans had ointments, but they didn't make huge batches of it every time because they just kind of spoiled what they did.
So if any of you guys get a chance to get some berries, get it. You probably have to render it yourself.
Yeah.
But I get it. It's just, in and of itself, it's curative, much less the
Absolutely.
stuff. It's really good for rheumatism. Both my mother and I use it, and it's good for burns and on broken bones too. And over that, I always make sure one or the other has it. And
Do you keep the bowl a little warm by temperature, like around 100 degrees, when you're decocting stuff to it, or cold?
I haven't decocted too much stuff into. I have it myself actually. Yago and Paul gave me some Yagos from Yago's bear grease with single oil in it. So that was cool. But I haven't had enough that I felt like making large batches of it. But yeah, there's so much difference in. I mean, like when it comes to water soluble, there's alcohol and there's water, and there's not a whole lot of difference between like grape alcohol and moonshine, corn, or grain alcohol, various kinds. It does turn out that European grain alcohol is made from whey, which might be kind of different. I don't know that I use that for people with milk allergies, but at any rate,
The whey doesn't have as much protein, but I've done confections with whey.
cool. All right. Yeah, that's another tradition, vinegar and acids. And then, let's see, what I was thinking, but with the animal oils or vegetable oils, there's lots and lots of differences. We don't know them all. And that's one of the mysteries of herbal medicine is that nobody knows how to, nobody knows all the different ways to extract and what's in there and how to get it out. It's just on and on. It's just, if the field was this, if you could limit it, it was this big, we know that much, And that's all the traditions put together, so.
They probably lost that much knowledge too over the centuries.
Because you get fermentations and all sorts of things, But I will mention some things so Western herbalism kind of has three major strains. One is Southern European, where they love the volatile oils, and they would think, "Wow, you're overcooking everything we want, all those volatile oils." They're sitting around making perfumes, and they're really good at Italy and France today. They're all full of people making all sorts of distilling off. So they invented stills and alchemy, and they separate all that out, and they make wonderful things out of the essential oils. And so we have that, and it's like, why would they dig up roots and barks? It's like, golly, I just want that. I can just pick the rosemary on the hillside. I'm not going to dig up the root of the rosemary or anything like that. So that's typical of, and so in addition, then they have like dill and fennel, and this goes on and on. They make different plants. So not that they don't have, they have like marshmallow root too in the Mediterranean. They would certainly decoct the roots and things like that. But then we move to Northern Europe, where we have, that's where we get the word herb. Northern Europeans, that would be like Germans and the English. They thought of the medicine in the green part. Like every year, the plant would go back in the wintertime, it would just be dead to them, and then in the summer it would be luscious and green, and they picked the green part and so that's what the herbaceous part of the plant is, the green part. The bush dies back. The herb is not the woody part. On the tree, we don't really call the leaves an herb per se, or not herbaceous, but that's what it means. is that an herb could be an annual that just comes right out of the ground green, or it could be the bush with the green part on it year after year, like lavender or rosemary, where there's a woody part, and then there's well, they don't die back in the wintertime, but lots of things in the north too. So that was where we got the word herb, and that was more their idea. And I also think that the English cook their food a long time, and that has something to do with the southern traditions too. And then we have the American Indian tradition, where they did use the roots and barks a whole lot. And that's not European tradition very much. And so like in the old days when I worked at Present Moment Herbs, if you were to go to Present Moment Herbs, and so there's 100 herbs that are from China and India, we discount them, and then there's 3 shelves as high as that window almost. And there's 350 herbs there. And if you looked at all the roots and barks, most of those would be from North America, and most of those would be Indian, from the Indian materia medica brought into Western herbalism. So Western herbalism is one of the few, Western herbalism and food or agronomy are the 2 sciences that we particularly inherit richly from the Indian people, because we have corn and tomatoes, and I was going to say peanuts, but that's Africa. We have corn and tomatoes and a lot of foods that we can, hot peppers that we get from the American Indians. Yeah, and then we have all these herbs. So we are heirs of the American Indian tradition. That's kind of neat, I think. I guess we could say a 4th tradition, and one could call it a 4th tradition because science always has pretensions of being superior to folk tradition, but that's all it is. It's just a ego tradition. And that would be scientific. So they began to be scientific. It's like, let's make tinctures and extract it. You see this like in the Civil War. The Southerners used herbs all the time, and the Northerners were like whiskey and turpentine and like things that had been distilled and manufactured and stuff like that. That's what they thought medicine was. And each of them got their healing on what they had, but also exotic herbs and trade items from across the sea that began to follow that scientific medicine era. So they would make the tinctures and things like that, and that comes more from that northern scientific impulse. I guess that's almost a 4th tradition. So all that has colored Western herbalism. So, and certainly a generation ago, actually, because the influence, like when Wayne Lassassier started, he just used capsules all the time because of the people not liking to use alcohol. That's kind of caught on. When I started, just to give you an idea, when I started at Present Moment Herbs 30 years ago, there was one company that made alcohol tinctures. One obscure company too, biotech. And people used capsules a lot more, and people used the bulk herbs a lot more too. So making tea, so usually infusions. Again, the infusions and shorter decoctions are more European too, and more what we were doing. So certainly pills, tablets, tinctures, and capsules are kind of what modern people want too. So there's that.
Quick, easy, and non-offensive.
What's that?
Quick, easy, and non-offensive.
Yeah. You know how many people complain about Chinese herbs too? Oh, it's so bitter and it takes so long. I don't make it.
That's true.
Yeah. So, let's see. Let's talk about solvency a little much, just for the fun of it. Let's see. Well, it certainly grows here, and it goes down there, and it grows in the great river valleys, like on the hills all around here. It actually grows a lot. It does like hill slopes, though. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but yeah.
I noticed it, it likes sun.
So semi-shade to full sun.
Yeah.
Different grow
And in between
Oh, your
areas.
cover has more sun.
more shaded.
More shaded.
They won't grow in the sun, they'll grow in the
It's too
sun.
hot down there.
Yeah.
But it does here.
That makes it pretty versatile, and I have seen it growing in very full shade too. But it does like open, but it likes that hillside, which is an interesting thing. So you just do not see it too much on flat ground very, very often unless it's in some of these herbs. So Tisdale would say that that in the we didn't talk about animal medicines that much, but when he mentioned the underwater camphor, which I used to think was a mythological creature completely, then I realized it also, in addition to being a mythological creature, was also a catfish. And indeed, that's a fish that's the well, they didn't have cats. They didn't have little cats. They had bobcats and canthers before the white man came, so they called it the underwater canther. They can be 10, 20, 40 feet long. So they are monsters, so they are underwater extraordinary. And they do live in the great river valleys. And he was a river person, the Muskogee. The Ojibwe would be more lake people. They have the underwater panther too. And so the plants would be an underwater panther medicine, and that's not usually a mucilage. Usually a watery plant, or a plant that acts on the waters of the body. And this is it's nourished, it's moist, sweet, a little acrid. It's got a twinge when it's fresh. It kind of depends on the species and maybe the time of year you pick it. That it's a little acrid tasting. It took me a while to define what that taste was. It's very definitely acrid. Acrid is a taste that actually tenses you up and then relaxes you. Acrid is a taste of bile in your throat. The Greeks called it the bilious flavor. And that usually relaxes tendons and movements and the nerves. So you put that together with the sweet, you get something that, guess what, relaxes and nourishes the tendons. And then you look at the plant, what does it look like? Little bones, vertebrae, knuckles. It could look like an intestine too. It could look like
What's that?
true salmon seal.
Oh, true salmon.
Yeah, as opposed to false. We'll talk about false now too. So that is grows around the northern hemisphere in every part of the world. Europe, Asia, Japan, North America, not on the west coast. So, and then it grows up above and it has joints and there's a flower at each joint. And the joints look on some species like the muscle attaching around the bone, like a fascia there. Oh, this is really suggestive of bones, ligaments, tendons, fascia attachments. And then the white color of the root, like bone. Because not all roots look so bone. So
Yeah. We have, I think, a different species that grows up here. Because first time I saw salmon seal up here, I was like, oh my God, that's gigantic salmon seal. Yeah, it was like that tall. We have a different species that only gets about this tall. And
we have that too.
you have that one too?
Yeah.
Y'all have the giant one too.
Yeah.
It does grow the need full shade because it's so hot. It doesn't even like partial shade all that much, but it does like the slope, definitely slope that gets wet on occasion. It likes wetness, but it doesn't like to be soaked. That's a good word. I use it for, like I said earlier, it's amazing for carpal tunnel as a decoction. That's my favorite carpal tunnel. And it's amazing how it takes the pain away and reduces the inflammation around the tendons going through this bony part of the wrist. And when people get carpal tunnel that affects their thumb, especially this fatty part of the thumb, it's really pretty. It's my favorite kind of thing for salmon seal and tendons. It really seems to have affinity for the thumb and the muscle and carpal tunnel. I also use it for people who have hiatal hernias and for people who have, I forgot what it's called. It's where the sphincter muscle at the top of the stomach pretty much quits working. You know what I'm talking about? It's not acid reflux, although people that have this have acid reflux. It's where the muscle there gets really lax and overstretched.
By the cardiac valve right there, right on the stomach.
The upper sphincter of the stomach? Or
Yeah.
The esophagus would be the patellar sphincter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That's cardiac sphincter.
Yeah, it doesn't close. It gets overstretched and it doesn't shut down anymore. And so they have acid reflux all the time, and it's very painful, and they can't eat a lot of foods, and even hard to pick up heavy loads because it strains this area right here. Solomon seal decoction is the only herb I found that made a difference in that at all. And it actually, I mean, I've got one client with that I'm working with now, and I've had several over the years, and I've tried all kinds of herbs for that. I've seen it more in women than men. But tried everything in the world. Solomon seal is like within a week of doing Solomon seal, half a cup decoction twice a day. She could eat anything she wanted to. 90% of her pain was gone, and the muscle was closing. And she even went back to the doctor because they were saying surgery. This is one of those things where they say surgery is your only recourse. And he was like, when he tested her, he was amazed about what had returned, what action and function had returned to that muscle. So, as a Native American remedy, which is how I was first taught Solomon seal. Solomon seal is for gastrointestinal. That was it's the number one healing gastrointestinal when. So I use it for IBS. I use it for Crohn's. I use it for I use it for inflammatory bowel disorders. IBS.
Did I mention it looks like an intestine?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when that was the first thing I was taught Solomon seal for, and the tendons was like a secondary thing. But also this area of wrist right here, of the lower arm, that's related to the intestines. So often if a person has this kind of like sore muscle carpal tunnel problem, then I'm always going to ask them about their digestion, and if their digestion's bad, I'm always going to ask them about how strong is this, or how strong is your grip? Does he have any pain or rheumatism feelings in his hand? Because they're really related, especially on the left wrist.
Antibiotics include extend carpal tunnel to overuse in almost any tendon ligament anywhere, and ligaments that are loose or too tight. As you age. So I use it too. I haven't used the decoction, so it does work in other forms. So I used it externally, made salves, students who made salves. Typical would make, I think you just made this up, a solid seal in rubbing alcohol. And, oh, that's other? Okay.
Rubbing alcohol is our only topical decoction, tincture. It's very common.
It's a very simple thing to do with almost anything to make it into an external usable plant substance. Okay, or also the vegetable that so he put it in rubbing alcohol. So, but I used it externally just about every form of animal, including the tincture that you're dripping on, which usually works too. It's not as neat because the tincture is real sweet. It's real sticky a little bit. Like I tincture it, by the way, in vodka because brandy's got so much sugar in it. Makes it real syrupy, and like Phyllis and Aaron, a bunch of the Twin City girls like to make it in the brandy. I didn't teach them that. I was shy away from that. I didn't like that. But they like that syrupy sweet quality to it. I don't know if you're going to use that in kids or something. But yeah, carpal tunnel, but almost any, and I remember right when I first began to use it, I had a case of one of my students, her son had stretched his tendon and it didn't go back in place, and the doctor said, oh yeah, we can just cut that out, so back together. And it was like an inch over thin than his foot. And so we gave it to her, and she applied it externally. I can't remember how. Could even have just been a wash of the plant or something. Could have been a decoction because we didn't have to make preparations then. But that both got nicely back in place really easily. And then, let's see, if your tendons are too tight as you age, this is a great remedy for aging tendons. And I would say, everybody over the age of 50 could use it. Most people over the age of 40, and most people that are playing sports of any age. Because as you age, your tendons get dried out, and then they don't stretch as far. Or if they do stretch, they won't go back. And so they got stuck, and it was a great, great case history for Madison. So I took a speech there 20 years ago. Tim Sartori, and he had a patient, and the woman, she and her husband had tried to get pregnant for 15 years, and no success. And I've seen this both as an herbalist and as a genealogist. Some people, some couples are looking for women in their fertility in late 30s or early 40s. Surprise, she's age 41 and she's pregnant. And they're really shocked and almost desolated, but then they decided it's a good thing. And she went to and had baby successful, but she had quite a bad prolapse afterwards. So Tim and the obstetrician were in the room with her after the birth, and the obstetrician said, "Oh yeah, well we can cure that prolapse, we can take care of that prolapse after." And Tim said, "Oh, how would you do that?" He wanted to know so that he could figure out how to cure it without medical. He said, "Oh, well we just cut the tendon off and sew it back together, all 6 of them. We sew them together, so it holds it up." He was like, as soon as the obstetrician left, he said, "I can cure you in 5 days." No, he must have had some divine providence or something. Because even I would have said 5 days, but he cured her in 5 days with Solomon seal. I don't know how he gave it, but he evidently had it on hand.
What would you?
That was quite a famous case there.
Could you use it with elderly prolapsed people?
Like bladder prolapse?
Well, because I mean, a lot of those old ladies have both the bladder and the vaginal prolapses.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, is it too late at that point when they're like?
Yeah, okay. When it comes to prolapses, sometimes you need astringents and sometimes you need more like tendon strengtheners because the tendons hold up and like the intestinal thing, there's tendons actually holding up even the hardest of them. So you get things where it fall over and decline and squash down. Sometimes it's the tendons, but with the bladder and the vagina, you might need astringents and stuff like lady's mantle or raspberry leaf, or you might need that, and you might need the true solid seal, but definitely you sure wouldn't give up. You sure wouldn't consider it incurable. The sooner you could get at it rather than after 20 years or something like that, then it would be.
And also, when we're talking about older ladies and bladder and vaginal prolapse, a lot of it has to do with the colon too. At that point, if a person gets a little constipated on a regular basis, that inflammation starts pressing downward, and bowel problems is the first thing I'll work on with prolapse, regardless of age. I'm going to look at their bowel first because it just sits. In women, it sits right on top of the bladder, and the bladder sits on top of the uterus. Much. So it's like a house, it's like, and the uterus is the foundation, and the intestines is the roof, so to speak. It's got to be self-supporting all the way down. And if the roof is not self-supporting, it's going to crack the foundation. So look to the intestines.
What about plantar fasciitis?
Yeah. I've used it, or must have used it for plantar fasciitis.
Plantar fasciitis.
Plantar fasciitis, and a combination we like is plantain and true solid seal, because the plantain looks like this white man's footprint. If you walk on it, so it reminds you of this old foot. It looks like a footprint. And I don't know, that's doctor's signature. Sometimes a plant like that will direct, like Hawthorne will direct things to the heart. And I imagine that the plantain will direct things to the bottom of the foot, but maybe that's
And change shoes.
Yeah. Do some stretches.
Yeah.
And you're saying do that as a decoction externally?
Internally.
Internally.
Well, yeah, I don't use only decoctions. But nowadays there are some salves. There's a couple companies making salves, but there weren't any originally. So I just had to rely on my students making salves, and a lot of them did, and a lot of them did have solvents in. So we did have that available. But it's a little bit choppy. On the internet you can find Solomon success. And I seldom recommend products, but I don't take a cut. But I really recommend Barbara's Amazing Salve, made by Barbara. It's no, it's not. It's what's amazing about it is that I mean, every time you put it on, she said, I call it Barbara's Amazing Salve because every time anybody put it on, they said, "That's amazing." They put it on, I said, "That's amazing." And I do have her. Yeah, okay. Her email I should have. This is program doesn't show the email address. Yeah, she's in. I'll find it for you, but she actually combined it with chickweed, which makes it act more on the interstitial fluids, which we'll get to that because that's collagen too. This solid seal acts on collagen too. You just almost tell from the color it's going to act generally through the whole.
I'm sorry, she mixed it with what?
Chickweed.
Oh, chickweed.
We'll get to mixtures in a little bit with this plant. But at any rate, just almost every single kind of tendon, ligament, and a lot of bone and muscle problems. Either because it does act on the bone and muscle, or because it's acting on the supporting fascia and ligaments. But one little distinction here. So I was over when students teach me, and so I was teaching at Charleston, and one of my students, Patricia Herbal, who's a yoga instructor, she said, "Oh, the different." And so Lisa and I started using the true and the false. She liked the false, I liked the true. The true is the traditional one used, and we could never figure out. Sometimes it would work for one, and sometimes for another. And we could never figure it out why, what the differential was. Why it just, if true solid seal didn't work, then you tried false solid seal, vice versa. But Pat had figured something out that the false solid seal, so-called, doesn't like that name. It likes to be called dragon root. And I wouldn't say this except that 3 different people, completely independently, have been told that by that plant, including myself. So yes, I think it's even 4 people by this point. It looks like a little dragon going in the ground. It's a really teeny little dragon. And so the name false solid seal is just so kind of almost insulting in a way. So I asked Sandra Boyd with Cherokee medicine, well, what's it called in Cherokee, and she translated, she said justice, basically would be the English justice. I thought that's a great, it's kind of like, that's kind of like Solomon restoring, Solomon's Association of Justice. So I thought justice root, ooh, that's a good name. So we're still trying to change the name of this plant. But Patricia, at any rate, she said, we'll call it dragon root. She said the flowers are at the end, and therefore it's good for the fingers and the toes and the hands and feet.